Okay, it looks like it's time to start. So welcome everyone. This session is getting the most out of a makerspace, and really what we're looking at is some general information about makerspaces and what they may look like and how to start one in your school, what grades a makerspace is for, and so on. This is my first time presenting in a VIA environment, so please bear with me and hopefully everything will go well. The session is being recorded and will be available by archive later. And throughout the session, please feel free to drop questions into the discussion area, probably on the lower left of your screen. And if I notice them during the presentation, then I'll try to answer them. If I don't, we do have some time at the end for questions and answers, and I'll get them then for sure. But it's always a good idea to jot down questions as you think of them, because you might not remember them later on. There are two files that are available to you for download. One is the slides that I'll be using. Now, I won't necessarily use every slide, but they're there for your use. And the other is a handout, and I'll reference a couple of parts of the handout as we go along, but there's more to it than that. My name is Sandy McDougall. I'm an ICT consultant at the Department of Education. I'm also the G Suite for Education Provincial Lead and a STEAM learning lead within the department. And I'm sort of the point person when it comes to makerspaces in the school, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. Prior to being here, I was a technology integration specialist at the Halifax School Board. I taught in junior highs within the Halifax system as well as the adult high school. So, really quick overview. The Maker movement is not a school-based movement. It started quite a number of years ago, but educating is always important to the Maker movement. It's all about learning through doing. It's peer-led and social. There are maker spaces scattered throughout the country, and the local Halifax maker space is actually in Bedford now, where people gather and use tools in kind of a cooperative and collaborative situation. Knowledge is based in networking, and that may be networking by technology or by social media or in other ways. Getting together for coffee is a type of networking, and those things are all integral to the maker movement. It's hard to tell exactly what created it. It could be a reaction to commercialism, devaluing of exploration and of inquiry, but it seems to have come more from urban areas in the U.S. than anywhere else, and then it's grown out from there. Late 70s, early 80s is sort of when we can trace the beginnings of the maker movement, and in the last 5 years or so, probably the real movement of the maker movement into schools and education in North America, United States, Canada, and elsewhere. When we talk about a maker space, there's no particular design or space that we have in mind. There's also no particular term or name that we necessarily use. We fall back to the makerspace term, but lots of different terms are used. Fab Lab, Hacker Space, Makerspace. One French one that I've heard is Carrefour d'Innovation, which translates into something like Innovation Hub or Intersection of Innovation. Which really kind of gives a nice idea about what it's all about. And sometimes makerspaces are a commercial business set up in sort of the same model as a local gym might be set up. That's a bit ironic in some ways. It's kind of contrary to the idea. Does it need to be called a makerspace in your school? It certainly doesn't need to be, and the idea can be school-wide. It doesn't need to be focused on one room. So the whole maker idea and hands-on inquiry can be, and really would be great if it was, a school-wide presence rather than just being in one room. So throughout the presentation, if I make reference to the term makerspace, I'm talking about all of those ideas, not just a room in a school. Over the last 20 or 30 years, we've come to a situation in education where students seem to have less hands-on time. There's a disengagement from STEM subjects in a lot of situations. And we often see this maker culture as being able to help in that way. So it may be possible to use maker type activities to lead students to accept failure as part of the path to success. When you're working on coding or working on a wide range of things, failure, and I hesitate to use that term, but lack of success is usually a step along the way, and it's a step to learning and making a better end result, usually. As I go through here, you'll see a lot of pictures of students, and these were all taken in maker spaces or areas within schools across the province in the last few years, and you'll see students doing a variety of activities. So I just wanted to include those because they provide some examples and some ideas of what some of these activities can be and what can be in a makerspace. This is a definition of making that I like, that kind of works with what we're talking about, the creation of something new that was not there before. And then we go on to a definition of makerspace, and that is a place that facilitates and encourages making, creativity, and innovation. Those two definitions work nicely with this picture. The guitar is laden here with some Lego robotics that are being controlled by the brick, the Lego brick there. And the students in that case felt that it would be a neat project to design a robotic arm that could strum the guitar. And that's what they did. So this robot can strum the guitar. Human intervention is still required to create the chords and press on the strings, but the robot can strum. Maybe the next step was including the other arm. There's a list of things that may be in a makerspace. It's not meant to be exclusive by any means or all-inclusive. All of these things and much more can be part of a makerspace or a maker sort of situation in a school. And of course, what you may have in your school or your makerspace is going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on resources and grade level and so on. We'll look at some of those things shortly. So it's a little bit difficult to do an interactive piece here, but in about 30 seconds or so, if you'd like to drop into the discussion area and put in some thoughts here, that would be great. I'll talk a little bit about what we see in some of the pictures, and you can just drop some thoughts in about why a makerspace. And if you have no thoughts, that's great. the top picture is a bit of a panoramic view of a makerspace in Antigonish. If you walked into this area and you didn't know what a lot of the stuff was, you might think that it was a bit chaotic. That's a little hard to see in that stretch out picture. But if you have some idea about what some of the things are, you'd be able to walk around and see a variety of stations. You might see a Raspberry Pi station and a 3D printer station and a textile and sewing station and a green screen station, which you can see quite clearly in this picture just off the left of center. And there are a number of other stations. But I mention that because one of the important things about a makerspace is that it may appear chaotic at times. Everything is not going to be perfectly neat and put away all the time. That's a sign of things happening and learning happening. The two boys in the lower left-hand corner are working on a hummingbird kit, which is a fairly easy, oh yes, Stephanie, right, problem-solving skills and collaboration. Excellent. Why a makerspace? And good example of collaboration in that picture that I was just making a mention of. So that's called a hummingbird kit, and it's a nice sort of all-together, all-in-one kit for some learning at a fairly simple level. And it's kind of designed for prototyping things and using cardboard and cereal boxes and so on to make things move and animatronic sort of things. Center one is a green screen setup, which doesn't need to be nearly that elaborate. I really promote the idea of patches of wall painted green. In most cases, the lighting in our schools is absolutely fine for green screen. The setup you see in the middle picture actually leads to some questions by the fire marshal's office, the Times, and safety. In order for that to be completely safe and acceptable, that curtain should be taken down whenever it's not being used. It shouldn't be left up, and so on. So much simpler to find a spot of wall and paint it green. And then the jumble of wires on the right is a couple of makey-makeys being used. And I'm not sure what they were doing there, but that's a little makey-makey station, which looks like a jumble, but I'm sure that there was great stuff going on there. The next three slides are excerpts from the other handout, and certainly not going to read through it all or talk about it all, but one of the things that you want to keep in mind, or you really want to think about, is your space. And there are a bunch of questions here that can help think about a specific space in a school, what kind of space you have, what you would need in the space, and so on, right down to very practical things like is there Wi-Fi available, are there electric circuits available, are there electric outlets available. Sometimes there's one outlet and that's not going to be enough. It'd be best to have outlets scattered around the room. Depending on what you're doing, you might want several circuits. I was in one room not too long ago, and it looked like it was really great. There were about 12 outlets throughout the room. Lo and behold, they were all on one circuit, so that may or may not have worked for them. So that's some leading questions, and if you were looking at creating or setting up a makerspace, you wouldn't have to answer all of these, but it would be a good idea to read through them all to sort of help you determine whether your space is sufficient. Another one is management and operation. Who's going to run the space? Is it going to be a specific space? When will it be open or available? Will classes just come in and out? How will students be supervised? Role of the classroom teacher, and so on. And then community, and how could community be a part of your makerspace? There are always things to be funded. There's always a need for some money to put new things in a makerspace, to refresh things. Will there be any involvement from the community in that way? Mentorships, tutors, and so on. So lots of opportunity for community involvement. Again, with this slide, it's part of the other handout, but it really is a nice chart to use as you're planning a makerspace. And if we start at the top, and really you can start anywhere, but if you start at the top, talking to your students is very important. So students really should have some ownership and some feeling of being part of the planning of this space. So talk to students, get to know them, get to know what they like, get to know what they do, tell them what you're thinking about doing, and get their input. Some of the best input to makerspaces has come from students. Do an assessment, look at what you have, what you need. One of the things that surprises people frequently is what's in the school. Especially if you're in an older school, you may have some wonderful treasures hidden away in closets and cupboards. Do a real thorough search of every area of the school and find all the stuff that may lend itself to hands-on making kind of stuff and activities. So frequently a school can populate a makerspace sort of room, at least a beginning room from stuff that's already in the school and often not being used. Do some reading, consider what's going on in other makerspaces, visit another makerspace if there's some nearby. Get involved with networking with other teachers, whether it's locally or globally. Find out what they're doing and get some ideas like that. And then themes and projects. So frequently I see makerspaces full of stuff, and then people wonder, how do I use any of this stuff and what's it good for? I would suggest kind of going at it from the opposite way. Think of a theme or a project or curriculum area that you want to make more interesting, more engaging, get more hands-on work with students, and then look at what you want to put in a makerspace to support that. And I think that would work well. Then order equipment and materials, then back to your students. So when things start arriving, when you start setting up, have some of your students. It may be a makerspace committee or a group, or there might be already students who are identified who would be great in doing that sort of thing. I talked to a teacher recently who told me about a student who was found school difficult from a behavior point of view, frequently was in the office as a result of that, wasn't engaged, wasn't interested, and then started being involved in the makerspace, rose quite naturally and easily into a leadership role, and now rather than being an annoyance to his classmates, he's a go-to person for his classmates when they're doing stuff, and people turn to him for help. That's changed his overall behavior in school as well as at home and in the community. So there are lots of benefits and things that can come from this sort of work with students. Put the next piece in here because a year or so ago we were hearing a lot of like, we're getting a makerspace sort of vocabulary. And I really encourage you to think about, rather than we're getting this thing, to think about it more in terms of we're going to be creating this thing for us, for our school community, for our students, for our staff, for our teachers, and we may be asking for some outside help or support in doing it. But the makerspace is yours to build. It's not it's not like one of those sheds that you buy at Kent and it comes and it gets dropped, boom, um, on your property. So it's yours to build, and every makerspace should be different depending on the school. So that kind of brings us to resources and how would you go about getting stuff. And there are lots and lots of answers to that. One possibility is a company from New Brunswick called Brilliant Labs that we have contracted with in the last few years. Brilliant Labs has 3 staff in Nova Scotia right now. They'll be interviewing this week for a 4th staff member, and hopefully soon there'll be a 4th person doing their work. Brilliant Labs can act as your purchasing agent in buying stuff and advising about what you might want to buy. Many of these items that we see in makerspaces are available in a lot of places, and they generally have a good idea of where the quickest and least expensive is going to be. They can also provide help to you as a teacher or to you and your students in using most of this equipment and getting it set up. You'll find information about them at brilliantlabs.ca. You can also contact me, and my contact information will be on the last slide. To get in touch with Brilliant Labs, to get your local representative's email address. So that's one option. Other sources of ideas and information: Discovery Center. Discovery Center has a nice, they call it an innovation lab. If you're in the Halifax area, either living here, teaching here, or visiting here, Discovery Center would be a great place to drop by, just even if it's just to go in and see their innovation lab and talk to their staff. Science and brain stores, there is one in Discovery Center. There are a few other kind of stores of that type throughout Nova Scotia. Go in and have a look at what those are offering. Adafruit is one of the distributors of a lot of the technology type things. So SparkFun, BC Robotics is another one. And of course, Amazon is a distributor of almost everything. But I do make the note there that be careful if you're ordering from Amazon and you're not familiar with using Amazon. If you use Amazon.com, then you could very well run into extra fees that you may not run into if you use Amazon.ca, because there may be import fees and so on, and extra price. So just be careful with that. Other resources, your Regional Center for Education staff, depending on where you are located, those people will be able to put you in contact with me. They'd be able to give you lots of information. They can also put you in contact with the Brilliant Labs folks. Technology mentors, technology integration people, they're called different things in each Center for Education. But those people are great resources. Your school leadership, so your principals, vice principals, are often knowledgeable, and if not, can help you reach out and contact other people. I mentioned before other schools and colleagues, online, social media, and me. Now, getting into some resources. I mentioned the Hummingbird Kit before. There's a picture of one there. Strawbees are a different kind of hands-on activity for building and kind of engineering and building structures. The next two slides have a number of books. I'm not going to talk about each of them, and to be honest, I haven't read them all. But some great books, either about maker spaces in schools and making and so on in schools, or the next slide kind of takes it a little bit beyond that, but it's still in the areas of innovation and design thinking and project-based learning and so on. So these are some excellent books that you might be interested in reading. Just some more examples of stuff that is available or possible in for makerspaces. I believe the upper right is called Tinkercad. Anyway, they're neat, and I've seen students build amazing things with them. And that's an example of a school that found bins and bins and bins of these in a storage closet that hadn't been touched for years. They brought them out, and the students loved it. Upper left is silk screening, and the lower middle is a hummingbird board that's used in those kits. I've dropped this one in here because it's really cool for elementary students, the Weird and Wacky Contraption Lab. In the last few minutes that we have here, just mention this. The reason I think it's awesome is that I watched some grade 3 students, I think, working with this at a school one day, and the language and the thought process that it brought out was fantastic, just between them. So the idea is to drop a ball. What do you do when you misplace the pig? Good question. I might have a bit of an answer. The idea is to drop the ball in the funnel, which you see in the right-hand picture up near the top of the picture, and then you build chutes and all sorts of things to make it drop down to the blue pad at the bottom, and the yellow thing that comes out from the blue pad is a launcher that you stick the pig into, and if you hit the blue pad the right way, the pig flies. You know, when pigs fly, you can see an animation of that or a cartoon of that on the box cover. But the marble or the ball has to drop with a certain force, and that's all accomplished through the chutes and the slides and so on. And these grade 3 students were using fantastic language to talk about that and things that we would expect, not necessarily the exact words, but the sort of ideas that you'd expect from grade 10 or 11 science. So when you misplace the pig, I was in another school recently that has a classroom that's full of this sort of stuff. Students are doing maker kind of stuff all the time, and while I was there, somebody from another class brought something in and said, "This broke, can you fix it?" And these were grade 5s and 6s, and they looked at it and they said, "Yes, I think we can." And that was a sewing project, but the principal told me that a couple of days before, the knob broke off one of the two-way radios they use for supervision. The vice principal brought it in, and the students designed a new knob and printed it on a 3D printer. So I'm thinking that when you misplace the pig in the contraption lab, you might be able to find someone to make a new one on a 3D printer. And if you don't have a 3D printer in your class, let me know, or in your school, let me know, and I might be able to hook you up with a class that would take that on as a challenge. Here's my contact information. Either of the email addresses is absolutely fine. Either my Google address or my @Nova Scotia address. And you can follow me on Twitter as well. And that brings us to about 4 o'clock. That was a huge gallop through a lot of stuff. I'll come back to this slide, but before I stop talking and pass it over to you for questions and answers, I'll just go to the other handout and do a quick run on that. So we saw a couple of things from this handout already, just a few more things. So funding and sustainability, where's that going to come from? A lot of the things in a makerspace or that you're going to be using with this kind of activity needs to be sustained. So if you're doing knitting, you need to buy new yarn sometime. If you're doing stuff with 3D printing, you need to buy filament. So the upfront cost is not the only cost. There are lots of options for that. There's lots of money out there, sometimes just for the asking, and sometimes just a little bit more. And then there's community involvement and support. Learning, do you have a specific design process you want kids to follow, and so on? So what's it all going to look like? And one of the questions I like in this list is, what will success look like? So does success always mean ending up where you as a maker thought you were going to end up, or maybe it doesn't? Maybe it just means learning along the way and coming up with something completely different. Vision, hopes, and dreams, that's a little bit of a philosophical, I guess, bit there. We've already looked at space management, community building, and the last slide was this one again there. So, again, with all of these questions, no need to be able to answer all of them, but maybe a good idea to be familiar with all of them so that you can sort of start to get your head around where you're going or where you want to go. Before I wrap up again, I just said that once, I do want to go back to a slide about Brilliant Labs, which is here somewhere. There. I want to go back to that slide and mention that there is funding available from Brilliant Labs. So if you go to brilliantlabs.ca and click on funding, you will come to a form which looks a bit overwhelming, but it's not too bad really if you just kind of go through it one thing at a time. Filling out that form and submitting it will could get you $500 of stuff. So if you have an idea for a project that has a curriculum link and you have some stuff you want for the project, go to brilliantlabs.ca, fill out the form, and apply for it, and you can get up to $500. And there's still funding left in that fund. We had a meeting about that yesterday. How do you access the handout? Well, if you can't grab it from somewhere on the page, and like I said at the beginning, I am new to VIA, so I can't tell you exactly where, then you can email me and I'll email it to you. But it's supposed to be downloadable from somewhere in here. Okay, any other questions about any of this? All very quiet. Was any of this useful information to you? That's great. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks, Stephanie. And also, if you have any other questions, I acknowledge that this was a quick gallop over lots of stuff. Just drop me an email. I see names, but I don't know any of you, I don't think, so I don't know where you are, but I'm happy to go and meet with you, even if you're in Yarmouth or Cheticamp. I will go meet with you, or we can do a Google Hangout, or we can communicate by email, or whatever works best. That's my job. Any other questions? I am happy to take questions for 10 minutes even. Okay, there's no point in us sitting here. listening to silence, so I don't want to take up your great and important time. Thank you for being here and being part of this webinar, my first, as I mentioned, and hope to hear from any or all of you in the future. And have a great afternoon and evening.